And here she is, Desi, all the way from Salt Lake City.
Yes.
How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute honor. And I know we've been waiting to schedule this in for probably a couple of months now.
Yes, it's been a crazy couple months, but I appreciate being, like I said, being patient with me, and we're finally able to do it. So I'm excited to be
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. So, as I mentioned in my intro, Desi is the host of Candle in a Dark Room podcast, which is also aimed at survivors of trauma. And, we always say that for those of us who are in this line of work, who are the light workers helping other people, there's always a story, as to why we're where we are today. And I just thought it'd be great to obviously hear your story.
Yeah. So my story is kind of long, so I'll try to make it shorten it as much as possible.
Okay.
So I kind of was basically born into trauma. My parents had a very toxic marriage, very abusive marriage, physically abusive, all of that. And so I grew up in, my first few years of life were already just traumatic. And then my mom and dad got divorced when I was 6, and my mom got remarried and my dad got remarried. So my mom met my stepdad. He was fine. I don't remember like really liking him. I always kind of felt off, but I was also a kid, so I just kind of, felt like I felt something off, but I wasn't sure what it was. But when I was 8, at least from what I remember, I'll kind of go into this, but from the first memories I have are when I was 8. I kind of have a lot of that time blocked out. But the first memory I have is 8, and it lasted until I was 15 years old. It was started off as, of course, just the grooming, molestation, and then it went to full child rape and sexual abuse. And that was an ongoing thing, like I said, for several years. And during those several years, he was very physically abusive as well. He would, knock me out, put a pillow over my face, punch me in the stomach, just very physically abusive as well. And then because of that, I had a lot of self-destructive behavior. I was a cutter. I had an eating disorder. I had tried committing suicide. Couple weeks before, so I tried committing suicide, and of course, it failed, and I had just kind of like had it, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I remember being up one night. I had finally talked my mom into letting me get a lock on my door because I was a teenager. And that night he had tried to come in and pick my lock. And I remember I just laid in bed and I didn't speak, and I just was frozen for hours. And then I remember when the sun came up, I always say I felt like a higher power took over me. For me, I felt like God was just like, all right, now, like we got to stop this now. And so something just gave me the strength I ran to school as fast as I could. And I went to a teacher who had actually been helping me already with kind of the mental health stuff. Like, she had helped me call the suicide hotline. She knew about my eating disorder. She would check on me all the time. So she was like a really good safe space for me. And so I felt like I could tell her. It was the first time I'd ever told anyone. I didn't tell my best friends. I didn't tell anybody. I was very good at keeping a secret. The thing about me is and I hate to admit this, but not so much anymore. But when I was younger, I hate to admit this, but I had to learn to be a really good liar, which I hated, but I had to learn how to be a good liar because I couldn't let people know. He would threaten me with knives, with, all types of things all the time, and that he would kill me. And he's definitely the type of person that would do it. And so I never in my mind thought, okay, he's not going to do it. If anything, I was just wondering when he was going to happen. Yeah. And so, he would say he was going to bury my brothers alive, that he would bury my parents alive, all types of different things. And so he was a very scary guy. And, kind of for reference, he was a big guy, and then he had tattoos, and then he had a tattoo that said "no fear." So he really had no fear. He just was didn't give a shit about anything. No. And so, I ran to school. Like I said, I told her, and she went to the school counselor and told the school counselor what I'd reported. But because I had they had known about my suicide attempt, the school counselor told her that I was lying and that I was just doing it for attention and that I was just being a drama queen or whatever. Wow. And I remember being terrified, she didn't believe me. Well, luckily my teacher fought for me and said, that's not our job to determine if she's telling the truth or not. We need to report this anyway. And so they did. They reported it. A detective came to the school, and I remember the detective sat down and she said, you know, your teacher told me that what happened to you, but your school counselor doesn't really necessarily believe what you're saying is the truth. I need you to understand that this is a really, really big accusation, and I need you to tell me right now if it's not true. And I don't know, I remember like I was shaking, and I think I started crying, and I just said, I promise that this is the truth. He's been doing this for years. I had to fake like I was okay most of the time, so no one ever knew. But I just told her, and I started crying, and I just said, if I go home and he knows I told you guys, he'll kill me. And I just knew that. And so I remember, I don't know if it was by my expressions or my body language or what it was, but I just remember her grabbing my hand and she started like tearing up. And she said, okay, I believe you. We're going to help you and make sure you don't go back home to him. And so that was kind of the beginning of that process, you know, the typical court process of going to court, and you know, my parents had to do their victim statements, and then I had a victim statement I was supposed to read. I tried to go up on the stand, and as I literally had a meltdown and in the middle of the courtroom and had to run out. I think being that close to him like really triggered me because he was sitting right there. Nowadays they'll do it to where like they can put the person in the other room, but back then he was in there, so I didn't really have that option. And so so anyway, he ended up, so during that time, after I reported him again, I started just like more self-destructive behavior. And then after I finally was able to, he was finally sentenced, and he got 3 to life for what he did to me, which isn't very much. My family actually ended up taking a plea deal because they didn't want me to testify on the stand because I mentally just wasn't in the right headspace to do so, which I appreciate. But then at the same time, it kind of sucks that they took a plea deal just because he didn't get as much time as he should have. He ended up being in there for 10 years, but the reason why he got 10 years is because he spent about 5 for what he did to me. But the other 5 was because he got attempted murder of his cellmate. He like broke his jaw and all types of stuff. So again, he ended up spending 10 years in there. During that time, it was, when he was abusive, it wasn't just, it's always traumatic, but it wasn't just like abuse every once in a while. Like he would check me out of school on her birthdays and holidays and tell me that it was like my gift. And, he a lot of really traumatic things in that. He was an alcoholic and, all types of different things. And so that in itself was really, really hard. After he was sentenced, I actually ended up in a residential treatment program, and I lived there for 2 years. I was diagnosed with dissociation identity disorder, PTSD, all types of, major anxiety, so many different things. DID, which is dissociation identity disorder. Most people, I guess, explain it as multiple personalities. I've never had multiple personalities. What would happen in my case was I would basically reenact incidences of my abuse. So there was very specific memories that I had, and I would go back. I'd be sitting there and I would go back to being 8 years old. So I would kind of like go off into a daze and just like completely disassociate from my body. And when I would come back, I would talk like I was 8 years old, act like I was 8 years old. I would ask for my mom. I would, I thought I was 8 years old, and I would completely reenact a situation. I would throw myself to the ground. My face would turn blue because I thought I was being suffocated. I wouldn't be able to move my arms. So it's a very rare disorder. Less than 2% of the entire world has it, at least identified. And so it is a very rare disorder. And so it was really hard for them to diagnose me of what was wrong with me. They ended up having specialists come in and from different states and, all that, and try to figure out what was wrong. Once they figured out what was wrong, it was kind of just a long process. So again, I was there for 2 years. And then when I was 17, I finally got out. And I say I did a little bit of work when I was in treatment, but it was more of, I was a teenager and I was just surviving. Like I was just trying to get through. Right. Yeah. Again, I had learned to become a really good liar. And so I was a happy kid and people had no idea that this was happening to me. And so people were surprised that, I can't believe that happened to you. Like you wouldn't know. And even to this day, like people who don't know my story, before I started my podcast and my foundation, didn't know my story, but have known me for years. And they're like, I never in my life would have thought that happened to you. I'm very good at I'm not, good at lying anymore, but I'm good at I'm gonna just keep going. I'm gonna just like continuing to go and go, even if I shouldn't. My body eventually will catch up and I'll get sick or something like that because I have a hard time slowing down. I get really overwhelmed. And so the way my body handles it is I have a lot of medical problems. I'll get sick really easily. So after I was in treatment, I got out. I just went through the motions of life. I met my husband and we moved in together. This is when I started my career as a counselor, and I started being a psych tech and different things. And then from there, it just kind of grew, and I ended up being a counselor and crisis worker for about over 12 years. I've done that work. But only about 5 years of this work, people have actually known why I do the work I do. I would go to work and do the work, but no one knew why. Everyone just thought it was because I was one of those people that just felt like being a therapist, felt like being a counselor, felt like being in this field. They didn't understand why. And I never told anyone. Only people that knew was the rehab that I had lived in. I actually ended up being a counselor at some point, which was really cool. So it's kind of a full circle thing. So they knew my story, but other than that, none of my other jobs knew. And so I was really good at my job. I was really good at what I did, and people always wondered why, but it's because I used my own experiences, and I was able to validate and understand more of what people were feeling because I had been there. And so during that time, I had several miscarriages. I ended up having 5 miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy.
Wow.
So I lost 6. I do have now 2 children. I have a 9-year-old son and my daughter will be 7 in a couple weeks. They're my miracles. My body is very damaged because of what happened to me. It was a lot more, again, than just the typical sexual abuse situation. There were other things involved. And so I have a lot of scar tissue, a lot of things that have damaged my body. And so, my doctors used to say, like, I wouldn't even have kids. I wasn't supposed to have children. And I kept getting pregnant, but my body just couldn't keep them. And so my kids are literally miracles because I shouldn't even have them. After my daughter, I did almost die. And so I ended up having to get my tubes tied. So I can no longer have any more children. But I was lucky to have the 2 I have. So I'm grateful for that. So anyway, that kind of goes into what I'm doing now. Again, so 5 years ago in 2015, again, I had been doing counselor. I'd been a counselor, this and that. My daughter was just born, and I got the call that my stepfather or old stepfather was up for parole. And so I tried to keep him in there. I wrote my victim statement. I actually read it this time in front of the court. I was ready to stand up and face him. I told him, that he took my life and he took my childhood, but he won't take my future. And so I thought it was a really good court hearing, and I didn't think he'd get out, and he was released. So in 2015, he was released, and this was shortly after my daughter was born. So if you're a survivor, you understand that once you have kids, it triggers even more, especially my daughter. My daughter is, 7, like I said, almost 7. She's almost the age that my abuse started. And I'm kind of preparing myself that that's going to bring up a lot of fear and a lot of stuff that I have to know to be ready to work through. So after he was released, I kind of went in a downward spiral again. My eating disorder kind of got re-triggered, and it just kind of, lots of different things of self-destruction. And my marriage started kind of having issues, and I wasn't wanting to communicate with my family and my parents, and just lots of, again, self-destructive behavior. And finally, I remember just being like, just about 2 years ago, I had just kind of hit my breaking point, and I was finally just like, I'm done. Like, I'm done letting him take this from me and making me fearful all the time, because he was released. And like I said, he lives near me. And so I always knew for some reason, since I reported him, that it wasn't over. And I don't know how to explain that other than I just felt it. I felt something in my soul was telling me it's not over yet. Something's not over yet. So I never felt free, even when he was in prison. I always felt like just waiting for the ball to drop. And so July 2019, I received a phone call from the FBI, and he said, my name is so-and-so, and I'm calling to tell you that your old stepfather was rearrested. And I was like, okay, yes, I was informed that he was rearrested. And he said he was arrested for child pornography. That didn't surprise me because I had heard that he had already gotten in trouble in his halfway house for that. So I kind of knew he had an issue with that. But, again, I personally believe pornography has a huge issue, a huge part in child abuse. And I advocate for that all the time, that pornography is a big impact on child abuse. And he was, and not just child pornography in general, I believe. And he was always into pornography. And so that was never, I remember walking out and seeing that like before, like he would abuse me and things like that. So that was always a big trigger for me. And so I knew he had a pornography problem, but I didn't realize it was child until he told me. And so, again, I wasn't fully surprised because of who he is, but then he said, I don't know how to tell you this. He's like, are you in a safe space for me to tell you some news? And I remember kind of being like, this is so weird. And I worked at the university hospital here as a crisis worker. So basically I would go on scene to, if someone was recently raped or something, they would call me and I would go and help them. Someone was trying to commit suicide. It was basically my job to talk them off the ledge, things like that. So I had a really traumatic job. And my partner was standing next to me, and I just looked at him and gave him a look. And he said, and the detective said, when he was arrested, we searched his apartment, his phone, and his computer. And he said, John had over 200 pictures of child pornography with your face cut out and put on every single picture.
That is gross.
So he had digitally and physically placed my face now and put it on child pornography.
Oh my God.
Whole other situation of being
gross.
re-victimized. I remember being so surprised because, to kind of go back a little bit, so in January 2019 is when I started my podcast.
Right.
And no, I'm sorry, not January. It was March 2019 is when I started my podcast. So this was like 4 months later. This was a short time later.
Yeah.
And I remember being so confused because I was like, or not confused, but frustrated because I was like, here I am advocating for other people, doing all this stuff, having people tell their stories and, trying to be an example, this and that. And yet I was being victimized this entire time.
Yeah.
He had pictures of me at work on scene to some situations. He had pictures of me on the front porch on my doorstep. He had pictures of me at the park with my kids. He had pictures of me at Costco, like weird pictures, like he was following me for a few years. And I always knew, and I remember telling, and this is the reason I say this and why I want it to be important is because I always tell victims to follow their gut. Follow your gut if you feel like something is wrong. Yes, it might be your PTSD, but it might not. And, I would tell my family, like, I swear I just saw him at Costco. Like, I just saw him. I just saw him following me in the car and so many different things. And nobody believed me. Everybody was like, oh, Des, it's your PTSD coming back. Like, why would he bother you again? And kind of just dismissed it until we found out that it was actually true. So that kind of was a whole game changer because
Stalker.
It was more stalker times 10. Like this is a lifetime crazy horror movie that like you don't feel like actually happens in real life. Like my abuser 15 years later, 10 years later, well, I guess by the time it was 2019 it was almost 15 years later that he had abused me physically. And because I was 15 when he did it, and so, or when it ended, I mean. And so 15 years later, who would have thought that he was still obsessed with me? And I was his screensaver on his cell phone. And I guess the police asked him who I was, and he told the police I was his girlfriend. So he has a full obsession of me. From what I've been told, he's obsession with me in prison. He did end up I testified against him last year. So July 2020, exactly a year later. And he got life. And so he is in prison for life, which is great. But this obsession is still there. From what I hear,
Mm.
he can search me on the internet, especially because of what I do, and find
Yeah.
pictures of me. It's kind of one of those things that I'll never fully be free of,
Mm.
in some aspect, but I'm free and in the fact that I can now determine what happens to my
Yeah.
life because of what happened to me. It's a little bit complicated too, because he's the father of my little brother. And so luckily my little brother has always supported me and has never wanted anything to do with him. But it's
Right.
still one of those situations where it's one of those problems that's always going to be a part of my life, unfortunately. But the reason I started my podcast was to give people a voice. In March 2019, it was probably that February or January, my husband came home and said, "Hey, you should do a podcast." I had every time I've told my story, I get, jaws dropped of like, this needs to be a movie. You need to do a book.
Yeah.
So this needs to be something. And I always wanted to, but I just like didn't know really how or where to start. And so when my husband told me to do a podcast, I had never heard a podcast. And I was like, okay, sure. So I grabbed my old computer and I went in my closet and I had like my little headphone cord with the microphone on it, and I recorded
Excellent.
an episode.
Ooh.
And the first episode I decided to release was in March. And I just was like, hey, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to release it. And I don't
Yeah.
think I barely edited it. I just like kind of just released it. And I thought it was going to be like my circle, my people I grew up with, like family, friends, whatever. The first episode went pretty viral. The first 24 hours, it had several thousand views, and it shocked me. And I remember being like, wait, why are all of these people listening to my story? I was so confused. And then I started getting messages flooding in on my Instagram, my personal Instagram and Facebook,
Wow.
saying, I heard your podcast. You gave me the strength to tell my story for the first time. I've never talked about it before. I've never told my parents, or I've never done, things like that. And
Yeah.
so that's when I realized, my story is very long, like I said. And so I had only released one episode. I had another episode I was going to release. And that's when I kind of realized survivors need an outlet like this. So there's
Mm.
not enough outlets like this for the people to be able to take their power back and use their voice for the
Yeah.
first time, and take their power in their voice by
Mhm.
telling their story. And so I started interviewing other survivors, and
Yeah.
my story is episode 1, 2, 4, and 8 on my
Mhm.
podcast. Season 1. Again, it's very long, and more details. But when after I started interviewing people and realizing, like, people need this outlet, people
Mm.
need to be able to talk about their story, I started realizing it needed to be more than that. And that's when this year, so what are we in 2021, almost 22. So the beginning of 2021, I decided I wanted to be a nonprofit foundation. So that, I guess, was the end of 2020. And so I filed the paperwork, and I hired a lawyer, and I did all the things I was supposed to do. And, especially after I testified against him in court in last July, again, I was like, I'm going to do this. Like, this is going to be a part of my mission. Like, I knew there's something bigger than just a podcast for me. And I
Yeah.
felt like this was it. And so, now we are a nonprofit foundation. We are technically
Wow.
a pending, but that's just because of the status. We're waiting for the finalization, but we are a pending 501c3. So we can still get donations and still do all of the things that nonprofits are allowed to do.
Mhm.
And now we do a lot of different things. So one of the things I offer is I go to court with survivors who face their perpetrators in court. I go
Wow.
to different places around the country and help just give them that strength,
Mm.
give them the words of, like, the powerful words of letting them know, like, now's the time. Like, you can take your voice back right now and
Yeah.
take your power back in your story, and not let this person take any more control of writing your story. Like, you're in charge of writing it now. And
Yeah.
so I give people the confidence to be able to, like, have the strength to face their perpetrators, because people don't realize that court is probably it's literally the most traumatizing thing. It's re-victimizing the victim over and over and over again, facing their perpetrator in court, sitting 10 feet in front of them, or on a screen, or whatever it is. And so court's a very hard process. And I know courts offer court advocates, and they're great. But what we offer is the advocates before court, during court, and after court. So we have a whole aftercare program that we help with. And it is, we do one-on-one sessions with me, which is a mix between counseling and coaching. So I do a mix of both of those. We do women's healing retreats. Our next one is in March 30th through April 3rd. It will be here in Utah, and it's a 5-day retreat of healing where we do all types of different things, meditation, inner child, yoga, sound baths. We do art. We do all types of different things with women that are like you. We don't sit there and talk about our stories. It's not a big traumatizing thing.
No.
It's more of coping skills and support and having a community of people that you can relate to who've been where you are. And it's not just sexual abuse survivors, it's domestic violence. It's people who have lost people to suicide or to mental health issues or, things like that. And so it's literally, we always say a pretty broad spectrum of, if you've been through trauma, you're a part of our circle, you're a part of our community. We help all types of different traumas, including adoption trauma, people who've been, have been through adoption. So you name it, type of trauma, we help with it.
Nice.
So yeah, that's kind of our purpose now. Again, I do groups, I do support groups, I do group courses. I do speaking. I'm a public speaker, so I speak at like colleges and high schools and rehabs and things like that. So yeah, I kind of have a lot of things, it's like I said, it's a very broad spectrum. I have a whole team that works with me. So yeah, if you want more details into what we do, just check out our website and contact me for anything like that. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And I'll be adding all the links on this episode as well. And yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, what are you doing at the moment to like for your own self-care?
So this time of year is kind of hard. So I actually, tragically, my real dad, he passed away in February last year. So during the pandemic, I had the pandemic, my dad died, then the pandemic hit. So he died in February, the pandemic hit, and then I had to go to court against my stepfather in July. So 2020 was a really, really hard year. My dad was only 49 years old. He died of stomach cancer. Which I am a big advocate on talking about that if you don't deal with your childhood trauma, which my dad never dealt with his sexual and physical abuse as a child as well. It not only has a mental health effect on us, but it has a physical effect on our bodies. I do a whole webinar and I teach this for people who want to look into it, but I have done research and studies and talked to psychiatrists and done so many different things to back up my research on this, that trauma makes physical effects on our bodies, not just mental health. And so I believe that's why my dad passed from stomach cancer. I believe he never dealt with his trauma. He held it in his core, which is, the main place where we hold our trauma. He ended up being a sex crimes detective, ironically, while I was being abused. So it was kind of just one of those weird situations. So when he passed away, I took a turn. I kind of went down again and really struggled with my depression. And, I think a lot of people in 2020 struggled with their mental health. I struggled with mine for sure. So this year I've really been trying to, focus on myself. I started counseling again. I believe there's nothing wrong with seeing a counselor. I'm a counselor and I see a counselor. I think that everybody should see a counselor at some point in their life. If not always, it's so helpful. I take an antidepressant, which again, I'm not ashamed about. I think it's something, I didn't take something for 10 years, but then as my mental health kind of spiraled, I realized I needed that help. And I believe it's fine. I take one and that's all I need. So I do all that kind of stuff. And then I might try to spend time with my kids, but a lot of what helps me is helping others. So I have a lot of court cases right now that I'm working on with people, and I have a lot of one-on-one clients that I work with. I just finished a group course and things like that. So I'm really helping me is by helping other people, but I definitely do self-care of I take alone time, I meditate, I go on retreats, I do a lot of inner work for myself, because I believe personally that when you've been through trauma, it's not one of those things that you're going to wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm healed, I'm all better. It is a lifelong journey. And I know sometimes that can kind of make people upset when I say that.
Yeah.
But I say it out of truth that it's going to be a lifelong journey. Does that mean it's going to be a horrible, traumatic, depressing journey your entire life? No, but you're going to have times in your life where you have to remind yourself of what you've been through and how you went, how you got through it, and use
Yeah.
the skills that you learned and use the coping skills and do the work. It's a continuous job. I have to
Yeah.
always remind myself doing what I do is traumatizing as a
Mm.
career. I hear stories of people every day. I go to court with victims who have been abused and trafficked and, all types of different things all the time. And so I've seen some and heard some really horrible things. And the question I get on a regular basis is, how do you do it? How do you do it as a
Mm.
survivor? And I feel like because of my mental health journey and this work that I've learned, and also my, the work I've done professionally, I've kind of learned to be able to separate the two.
Okay.
Of this fires me up to want to help more people
Yeah.
instead of it being a trigger. Yeah, sometimes I'm triggered and I kind of have to like realign myself and like, do what I need to do to get myself to a good space. But more times than none, it just makes me be like, this is why I do what I do, because of
Yeah.
people like this guy who's hurting children, or people like this girl who found her power and now she doesn't want to kill herself and wants to
Mm.
become a wife and a mom and have a career of her own when she didn't want to do that a year ago,
Yeah.
things like that. So, it's hard work, but I love what I do. I am super grateful that I have the opportunity to do what I do as a career.
Mm.
Um, but it's definitely important for me to also always remember to put myself and my mental health first, or else I'm not going to be able to help other people. So
Yeah.
I definitely do try to do as much self-care as possible.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. And are there any recommendations for my listeners, resources or?
Honestly, resources there's so many different cool resources out there. Also on the speakers bureau for RAIN, which is also a national, people know who RAIN is. They have set like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a rape crisis line that
Yeah.
you can call. But also, Candle in a Dark Room is my foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's Candle in a Dark Room. People
Yeah.
sometimes get it confused, but I've talked to people as far as London. I've talked to people all over the world who have contacted me because of their situations. So
Mm.
if you need someone to talk to, you need resources, you want to be on my podcast, or you just, want to take one of my courses or whatever it is, please, please, please look us up either on our website or on Instagram. And yeah, we are always offering many different things for survivors. So, and a lot of it's virtual too. So like even support groups and stuff can be virtual.
Excellent. So I love that, because as you know, podcasts are global. So I do hope that
Yes.
everybody around the world is listening, and that, they do get in touch with Desi, because I just think what you're doing out there is wonderful. You're just
Thank
helping
you.
so many people, and you are an inspiration to us all. And
Thank you so
especially
much.
after what you've gone through as well, it's the fact that you can keep helping other survivors, and that story keeps coming back, but you've learned to kind of disassociate yourself from it,
Get
which,
back up. You
yeah,
get knocked down. Life is going to continue to knock us down. And you just have to get back up and continue
exactly.
living the life. And that's my purpose in Candle in a Dark Room, is to show people that even in the darkest of darkness, even after the darkest things happen to you, and
Mm.
I've heard it all. I've heard all the horrible things that you can think of. I've heard in real life. And you can still find light in that darkness, whether it's within yourself, whether it's within a higher power, whether it's within finding a resource that helps you find that light. There's always light in that darkness. And sometimes you just have to be patient and you will find it. So, just know that there is light within all of us. And sometimes you just have to search for it. So,
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Desi. It's been an absolute honor
of
having you
course.
on. And yeah, so we
Thank
are
you for
the
having
ending.
me.
Oh, it's an absolute honor. So, listeners, please do get in touch, and please do go check out Candle in the Dark Room podcast. Check out Desi's foundation as well, which I know that you'll benefit hugely from. Thank you so much, listeners. We love you. Stay empowered and stay
Yes.
blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you.